All right, and it is official. Prime Minister Bayrou has lost his confidence vote once again, throwing Parliament into disarray and forcing President Macron not only to have egg on his face once again, but also to make a significant decision rather soon, Melissa.
That's right, and it's a fairly resounding defeat. Remember that this was a confidence vote that François Bayrou himself had called. In the end, only 194 lawmakers gave him their confidence. It's 364 that voted against giving him their confidence, and for a variety of reasons. And so the question now, whether this absolute majority of 280 against him can now, what happens next? How Emmanuel Macron can appease a sufficient number of those very divided parliamentarians. Remember, some are on the far right, some are on the far left. They have very differing views about what needs to happen next. How he can appease enough of them to give them the confidence to back anyone, frankly, at this stage, who's going to be responsible for making extremely unpopular decisions. Remember, François Bayrou lost this vote on the back of that very unpopular announcement back in July that he was going to slash 44 billion from next year's budget. That involved things like slashing 2 public holidays, a number of cuts that he believed were necessary for France to try and redress its books. The next prime minister who tries to do that, and inevitably someone will have to try to, is likely to face exactly the same kind of consequences as we've seen here tonight. So a very difficult circle for Emmanuel Macron to square, particularly, Bianna, when so much of the anger, both parliamentarian and on the streets that we're likely to see on Wednesday, is now directed immediately at him and his presidency, and the shambles in which it appears to be heading towards the conclusion in 2027. Bianna.
All right, and for those of you who are just joining us, that headline rings true that you're seeing right there on the lower third of your banner. French government has collapsed officially as the Prime Minister has failed a no confidence vote within Parliament and will have to tender his resignation. The headline here also, if we're going to bring in one of our other contributors here, Anna Kubin, can talk about the significance of France and President Macron having to appoint now what will be his 5th Prime Minister. That is one option for him. He could form another coalition. He could form or call for a snap election. That is something that some of the leaders of the far right and left are basically daring him to do at this point. Just give us a sense of where things stand right now following this decision.
Well, Macron will probably face the same issue that's currently tanked this government. Fundamentally, France needs to control its budget. It needs to get its spending under control. At the end of last year, its levels of debt were around 113% of its GDP, which was one of the highest in the Eurozone. Now, François Bayrou, the Prime Minister that's just lost his confidence vote, he has made the point that France is in grave danger financially. It needs to make some hard decisions. And he's tried to put forward this 44 billion euro savings plan, which included removing a couple of national holidays, freezing spending in many areas. Now, this was very unpalatable to both the right and the left, and it seems difficult to imagine that any incoming Prime Minister is not going to face the exact same problem. To give you a sense of the scale of this challenge that France currently faces, François Bayrou was saying in July that France risked getting crushed by debt, and actually the interest payments alone on France's ballooning debt would amount to about 100 billion euros in 2028. And that would be the single largest government expense of France, bigger than the education budget. So that gives you a sense of the stakes here, that the scale that the new incoming French government will have to face. I just can't see that there's going to be a huge amount of willingness in an even more divided parliament potentially to make these hard choices.
Melissa, if I can go back to you and sort of zoom out, obviously this is a domestic crisis here, but it has implications far beyond that of France, as Macron over the last 3 years, and I would say even over the last few months, has really stepped up as the leader of European allies there in terms of its defense and strong defense and support of Ukraine. Does this distract him from that in any sense, and what are the ramifications if that does happen?
Well, I think I think on the contrary, what you've seen here in France, I was talking a moment ago about that growing anger and that you're likely to see spill out on the streets on Wednesday and then again on the 18th. There's a lot of anger here in France by what many people perceive to be a French president who spent a lot of time dealing with foreign crises and shining on the world stage, even as the political situation and arguably the question of finances and how to deal with the debt and how to manage his majority or losing his majority, how the president has dealt with that. And I think that's also why there's a great deal of anger towards him. But you're quite right. This is a French crisis, but it becomes also a European one, since it is according to Europe's own spending rules that France has been being ticked off for years now and trying to encourage to get things back in shape. And it has implications also for the Eurozone. There's been a lot of talk these last few weeks about the fact that just like 15 years ago, Greece and Italy, France is seeing rising borrowing costs, with political classes apparently unable to agree on the sort of austerity measures that might be taken to help address that looming crisis. There is a big difference here, which France is much too big to fail. It's Europe's second biggest economy. But the question of the ungovernability or not of France over the next few months does pose itself at the Eurozone level going forward. So all eyes very much on what Emmanuel Macron does now. We expect François Bayrou in the wake of that fairly resounding vote, a majority of 280 against giving him the confidence of MPs. He is now expected to tender his resignation to the president, who will accept it. The question is who he decides to hand what is likely to be a poison chalice to next.
Yeah. Who will be the lucky person raising their hand to take on that job? I'm not sure. Anna Kubin, final question to you as far as the consequences of this no confidence vote for the economic future, at least in the short term for France. I know in the last hour you were talking to us about your conversation on just that point with Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. What did he tell you?
Well, I asked him the question that Melissa has just alluded to there, which is, is France in the same position that Greece was in about 15 years ago? And his resounding answer was no. Things were much more serious back then. Greece had to have several IMF bailouts. There isn't really an indication that France is in the same position. France is a growing economy. The IMF predicts it's going to grow this year and next by about 1% next year. So, there are many things to rave about France's economy, but the debt is a huge issue, and I think we can see this with investors today. The yield on the 10-year French government bond is rising. It's heading towards Italy. It's around 3.4% right now. And what that basically means is that the higher the yield on the bond, the more investors basically see holding French debt as being a risk. They see the risk of the government not being able to repay that debt as being higher. But what's interesting is that the yield on this debt is now higher than Greece, and nobody would have thought that a few years ago.
No, and the headline that we're getting now, Prime Minister Bayrou will be officially submitting his resignation to President Macron on Tuesday morning after losing this no confidence vote.